Eli Hart was nobody. For 25 years, he'd been the shadow in his own life, the third triplet, the one nobody noticed. But tonight, standing in the electric pulse of Times Square, his name blazed across a billboard, and the world finally saw him. Eli's breath caught as he stared up at the glowing letters. His heart hammered, not from the cold November wind slicing through his thin jacket, but from the surreal weight of being seen. Around him, New York buzzed, taxis honked, tourists snapped photos, and the city's heartbeat thrummed through the pavement. He felt like he was floating, untethered, until a warm hand squeezed his. Julian Rivera, his anchor, stood beside him, his dark eyes glinting with pride. "You did this, Eli," Julian whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "This is all you." On Eli's other side, his brother Ezra shifted, his identical face softer, more hesitant. The third triplet, Ethan, was somewhere in the crowd, probably watching from a distance, as he always did. The Hart triplets, Ezra, Ethan, and Eli, had been born minutes apart, but their lives couldn't have been more different. Ezra was the golden boy, charming and ambitious, now a rising star in finance. Ethan was the dreamer, a poet whose words captivated open-mic nights in Brooklyn. And Eli? Eli was the forgotten one, the quiet kid who faded into the background, the one their parents barely acknowledged. Growing up in a small New Jersey suburb, Eli had learned early to shrink himself. His brothers shone, and he let them. Ezra's trophies lined the shelves. Ethan's poems were framed on the walls. Eli's sketches, tucked under his bed, were never seen. He didn't resent his brothers, not really. He loved them fiercely, even when their light cast him into shadow. But love didn't stop the ache of being invisible. That invisibility followed him to New York University, where he studied art, while Ezra majored in business and Ethan in literature. Eli's portfolio was brilliant, vibrant paintings that bled emotion, but no one noticed. Professors praised Ezra's charisma. Classmates flocked to Ethan's readings. Eli kept his head down, his heart buried in his canvas. Then he met Julian. It was a rainy Tuesday in a Greenwich Village cafe, the kind of place where the coffee was overpriced and the air smelled of damp wool. Eli was sketching in a corner, his hoodie pulled low, when Julian slid into the seat across from him. "You gonna let anyone see that, or is it just for you?" Julian's voice was warm, teasing, his smile like sunlight breaking through clouds. Eli froze, and used to being noticed. Julian was everything Eli wasn't: bold, magnetic, a theater major with a laugh that turned heads. Somehow, that chance meeting turned into late-night talks, shared playlists, and a first kiss under a flickering streetlight that made Eli's world tilt. Julian saw him. Not Ezra, not Ethan, Eli. For the first time, Eli felt like he mattered. But even Julian's love couldn't erase the years of being overlooked, the nagging fear that he'd never be enough. That fear clung to him like damp clothes, especially now, as he stood in Times Square, his name glowing above him. The billboard was no accident. It was the culmination of months of secret work, a project Eli had poured his soul into. He'd submitted his art to a citywide contest for emerging artists, a long shot he hadn't expected to win. His piece, a mural called Unseen, was a swirling explosion of color and shadow, depicting three figures, one bold, one dreamy, one fading into the background. It was his story, raw and unfiltered, painted for the world to see. When he got the call that Unseen had won, that it would be displayed in Times Square, he hadn't believed it. Even now, staring at his name, he half expected to wake up. "Eli," Ezra said, his voice pulling Eli back. "This is huge. You know that, right?" Ezra's usual confidence was tinged with something new, admiration. Eli swallowed, unsure how to respond. Ezra had always been the leader, the one who spoke for them all. But tonight, Eli was the one in the spotlight. The crowd around them thickened, people pointing at the billboard, whispering about the artist named Eli Hart. Julian's hand tightened around his, grounding him. "They're talking about you." Julian said, his voice low and fierce. Let them. Eli's chest ached. He wanted to believe this moment was real, that he wasn't the forgotten triplet anymore. But doubt gnawed at him. What if this was a fluke? What if, after tonight, he faded back into the shadows? As if sensing his thoughts, Julian leaned closer, his breath warm against Eli's ear. You're not invisible anymore. You never were to me. Eli turned to him, their eyes locking. Julian's gaze was steady, unwavering, and for a moment, the chaos of Times Square melted away. It was just them, Eli, the boy who'd spent his life hiding, and Julian, the man who'd taught him to step into the light. But the moment shattered. A shout cut through the crowd, sharp and urgent. Eli, Ezra. It was Ethan, pushing through the throng, his face pale. You need to see this. Eli's stomach dropped. Ethan's voice wasn't dreamy or poetic now. It was raw, almost panicked. He held out his phone, the screen glowing with a news article. The headline hit Eli like a punch. Triplet artists win sparks family controversy. Parents claim credit. Eli's vision blurred. His parents. Of course. They hadn't spoken to him in months. Not since he'd come out to them, and they'd responded with cold silence. Now, they were claiming his victory? The ache in his chest turned to anger, sharp and unfamiliar. He'd spent his life shrinking for them. But this was his. We need to fix this, Ezra said, his jaw tight. They don't get to do this to you. Eli looked between his brothers and Julian, their faces a mix of fury and loyalty. For the first time, he felt the weight of their support, not just Julian's, but Ezra's and Ethan's too. They were in this together. But how do you fight a lie when it's your own family telling it? The air in Times Square felt heavier now, the neon lights casting harsh shadows across Eli's face. The headline on Ethan's phone burned into his mind. Parents claim credit. His parents, who'd barely acknowledged his existence, were now twisting his triumph into their own narrative. Eli's hands trembled as he handed the phone back to Ethan, his throat tight with a mix of rage and betrayal. Julian's arm slid around Eli's shoulders, a quiet anchor in the storm. They don't get to take this from you, he said, his voice low but fierce. This is your moment, Eli. Yours. Ezra paced a few steps, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. This is bullshit, he muttered, running a hand through his hair. They've ignored you for years, and now they're pulling this? We're shutting it down. Ethan, usually the calm one, nodded, his eyes dark with resolve. They're telling reporters they inspired your art, Eli. They're saying they supported you all along. It's a lie, and people are eating it up. Eli's stomach churned. He could picture his parents, Margaret and David Hart, sitting in their pristine New Jersey living room, spinning a story for the cameras. They'd always been good at appearances, at crafting a perfect family image that never included him. When Eli came out at 19, their response wasn't anger. It was worse. It was silence. They'd looked through him, like he was a ghost in their house. Now, they wanted to claim his success? We need to go, Ezra said, his voice cutting through Eli's thoughts. There's a news van over there. They're probably looking for you. Eli's heart raced. He wasn't ready for this. Cameras, questions, the world's eyes on him. He'd spent his life avoiding attention, and now it was crashing down like a tidal wave. But Julian's hand found his again, steady and warm. You don't have to do this alone, Julian said. We've got you. They moved through the crowd, the four of them weaving past tourists and street performers. The news van was parked near a pretzel cart, its crew setting up cameras under a glowing McDonald's sign. A reporter, a woman with sharp cheekbones and a microphone, spotted them. Eli Hart, she called, her voice carrying over the noise. Eli froze. Julian stepped closer, his presence a shield. Ezra took charge, striding forward. What do you want? He asked, his tone clipped but professional. The reporter smiled, undeterred. I'm Lauren Chun with Channel 7. We're covering Eli's mural win. Your parents gave an interview earlier, saying they've been your biggest supporters. Care to comment? Eli's throat closed. He wanted to scream that they'd never supported him, that they'd barely spoken to him in years. But the words wouldn't come. Ethan stepped in, his voice quieter but firm. Our parents are mistaken, he said. Eli's art is his own. Always has been. Lauren's eyes gleamed, sensing a story. So you're saying there's tension in the family? Can you elaborate? Ezra shot Ethan a look, a silent warning to tread carefully. But Eli felt something shift inside him, a spark of defiance. He'd spent too long being silent. They didn't support me, he said, his voice shaky but clear. They didn't even know I was submitting to the contest. This, he gestured to the billboard, his name still glowing above them. This is mine. The reporter's eyebrows shot up, her pen scribbling furiously. Julian squeezed Eli's hand, a silent "I'm proud of you." But before Eli could say more, a familiar voice cut through the crowd. Eli. He turned, his heart sinking. It was his mother, Margaret, standing a few feet away, her face a mask of composed surprise. David, his father, stood beside her, his expression unreadable. The cameras swiveled toward them, and Eli felt the air sucked out of the moment. Sweetheart, Margaret said, her voice dripping with a warmth Eli hadn't heard in years. We're so proud of you. The lie was so blatant it stung. Eli's jaw tightened, and he felt Julian tense beside him. Ezra stepped forward, his voice cold. Don't do this here, he warned. Not now. But Margaret ignored him, her eyes locked on Eli. We've always believed in you, she said, loud enough for the cameras to catch. All those years, we knew you'd do something great. Eli's vision blurred with anger. He wanted to call her out, to tell the world the truth, that they'd ignored him, dismissed him, erased him. But the cameras were rolling, and the crowd was watching, and he felt the weight of every eye on him. He wasn't ready for this fight. Not here, not now. Julian leaned in, his voice a whisper. You don't owe them anything. Walk away if you need to. Eli nodded, his throat tight. Let's go, he said, his voice barely audible. He turned, pulling Julian with him, Ethan and Ezra falling in step. The reporter called after them, but Eli didn't look back. His parents' voices faded into the city's hum, but their words clung to him like damp air. They ended up in a quiet diner a few blocks away, the kind with sticky tables and fluorescent lights. Eli slid into a booth, his hands still shaking. Julian sat beside him, close enough that their knees touched. Ezra and Ethan sat across, their faces a mix of worry and anger. They can't do this, Ezra said, his voice low. We need to set the record straight. A statement, an interview, something. Ethan shook his head. It's not just about the story. It's about Eli. What do you want, Eli? Eli stared at his hands, the calluses on his fingers from years of holding paintbrushes. He'd never been asked that before, not by his family, not really. I just want the truth out there, he said finally. I want people to know this is mine, not theirs. Julian's hand found his under the table, a quiet promise. Then we'll make sure they know, he said. But we do it your way. The diner's jukebox kicked on, playing an old Springsteen song, and for a moment, Eli let himself breathe. He wasn't alone anymore. He had Julian, his brothers, and his art. But the fight was far from over. His parents' lie was spreading, and if he didn't act, it could swallow his moment whole. The diner's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow on the chipped formica table. Eli traced a crack in the surface with his fingertip, trying to ground himself. The weight of his parents' lie pressed against his chest, making it hard to breathe. Across from him, Ezra was already typing on his phone, his brow furrowed as he drafted something. A statement, probably. Ethan sipped his coffee, his eyes distant but thoughtful, while Julian's hand rested on Eli's knee, a steady warmth. We need a plan, Ezra said, not looking up. The story's already spreading online. Hashtags, comments, the whole deal. If we don't counter it now, their version sticks. Eli's stomach twisted. He'd never wanted this. Attention, drama, a public fight. All he'd wanted was to paint, to tell his story through colors and shapes. But now his story was being rewritten, and he couldn't stay silent. What do we do? He asked, his voice quieter than he meant it to be. Ethan leaned forward, his poet's intensity sparking. You tell your truth, Eli. Not just about the mural, but about you. Who you are, what you've been through. People will listen. Eli's throat tightened. Telling his truth meant exposing everything. His parents' neglect, his years of feeling invisible, his struggle to accept himself as a gay man in a family that turned away. It meant baring his soul to strangers. I don't know if I can, he admitted. Julian turned to him, his dark eyes fierce. You can. You're stronger than you think, Eli. And you don't have to do it alone. Ezra nodded, setting his phone down. Ethan's right. A statement's not enough. You need to go public, your way. Maybe a video, an interview, something raw. Show them who you are. The idea made Eli's skin prickle. He'd spent his life avoiding the spotlight, letting his brothers shine. But this was different. This was his art, his heart, his truth. He thought of Unseen, the mural now glowing in Times Square. It was a piece of him, and he couldn't let his parents steal it. Okay, he said finally, his voice steadier. But I need to do it right. Not some rushed interview with that reporter. Something real. Julian grinned, a spark of pride in his eyes. That's my guy. They spent the next hour brainstorming in the diner, the jukebox cycling through old rock hits. Ethan suggested a short video, something Eli could post online to tell his story. Ezra offered to handle the logistics, finding a quiet space, setting up a camera. Julian, ever the theater kid, volunteered to help Eli rehearse, to find the words that felt true. By the time they left the diner, the city had quieted, the late-night streets glowing with a softer energy. They walked to Julian's tiny apartment in the East Village, a fifth-floor walk-up crammed with theater posters and half-finished scripts. It was a mess, but it was home, more home than Eli's childhood house had ever been. Inside, they set up in the living room, pushing aside a coffee table cluttered with empty takeout containers. Ezra borrowed a camera from a neighbor, a film student who owed him a favor. Julian dimmed the lights, creating a warm, intimate glow. Ethan scribbled notes, helping Eli shape his thoughts into something coherent. Eli sat on the couch, his hands fidgeting in his lap. The camera's red light blinked, and his heart raced. I don't know where to start, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Julian knelt in front of him, his hands resting on Eli's knees. Start with why you painted Unseen. Tell them what it means to you. Eli took a deep breath, his eyes locked on Julian's. The room faded, and it was just them, like that first night under the streetlight. Okay, he said. Let's do this. The video took hours to get right. Eli stumbled over his words, his nerves betraying him. But Julian's encouragement, Ezra's quiet nods, and Ethan's gentle prompts kept him going. By 3 a.m., they had it. A 5-minute clip of Eli speaking from the heart. In the video, Eli sat against the backdrop of Julian's cluttered apartment, his hazel eyes bright with emotion. I'm Eli Hart, he began, his voice steadying as he spoke. I painted Unseen because I know what it's like to feel invisible. I'm the third triplet, the one who was always in the background. My brothers, Ezra and Ethan, they're incredible, and I love them. But growing up, I was the one nobody saw, not my parents, not my teachers, sometimes not even myself. He paused, his throat tight. When I came out as gay, my parents didn't yell or fight. They just stopped seeing me, like I didn't exist anymore. But I kept going. I painted, I dreamed, and I found people who saw me for me. He glanced at Julian, off camera, and a small smile broke through. This mural, Unseen, is about that. It's about the parts of us that get overlooked, the parts that still matter. My parents didn't inspire it. They didn't support it. This is mine, and I'm done letting anyone take it away. When they finished, Ethan uploaded the video to a new social media account Ezra had set up for Eli. They tagged the contest organizers, local art blogs, and even the reporter from Times Square. Within minutes, the views started climbing, first dozens, then hundreds. Eli watched the numbers tick up, his heart pounding. What if this backfires, he whispered. Julian pulled him close, his arms a safe haven. It won't. You told the truth. That's enough. But as the video spread, so did the backlash. By morning, Eli's phone buzzed with notifications, supportive comments from strangers, but also angry messages from people defending his parents. A new article popped up, quoting Margaret, "Our son is confused. We've always loved him." The lie twisted deeper, and Eli felt the ground shift beneath him. "We keep going," Ezra said, his voice firm. "This isn't over." Eli nodded, but doubt gnawed at him. He'd taken a stand, but at what cost? His parents' story was louder, backed by years of their polished image. Could his truth really compete? Eli woke to the sound of his phone buzzing relentlessly on Julian's nightstand. The morning light filtered through the apartment's cracked blinds, painting stripes across the bed where he and Julian lay tangled together. He reached for the phone, his stomach knotting as he saw the flood of notifications. The video they'd posted last night had gone viral. Tens of thousands of views, shares, and comments. Some called him brave, others called him a liar. His parents' supporters were loud, their comments sharp with accusations: ungrateful son, disrespectful, making it all up for attention. Julian stirred beside him, his arm tightening around Eli's waist. "You okay?" he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. Eli shook his head, scrolling through the comments. "They're saying I'm lying, that I'm tearing my family apart." Julian sat up, his dark hair a mess. He took the phone gently from Eli's hands. "Don't read those. Focus on the good ones. Look, there's a whole thread from other artists supporting you. And this one, from a queer youth group. They're calling you an inspiration." Eli tried to smile, but the weight of the backlash pressed down on him. He'd wanted to tell his truth, but he hadn't expected it to feel like this, like he was shouting into a void, only to be drowned out by louder voices. Ezra and Ethan arrived an hour later, carrying coffee and bagels from a deli down the street. Ezra's face was grim as he set the food on the counter. "The media's picking sides," he said. "Some outlets are running with mom and dad's story, saying you're estranged and troubled. But others are sharing your video, Eli. It's splitting the narrative." Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, his notebook open. "I've been reading the comments. The art community's behind you. They're sharing photos of Unseen, talking about how it resonates. You're reaching people, Eli." Eli's chest tightened. He wanted to believe Ethan, but the doubt lingered. What if it's not enough? They've got money, connections. They'll keep spinning their story. "Then we fight harder," Ezra said, his voice fierce. "I've got a friend at an indie news site. They want to do a feature on you, your art, your story, the real one. No fluff, no lies." Julian nodded, his hand finding Eli's. "And I've got theater friends who can amplify your video. We'll get it to the right people, bloggers, influencers, anyone who'll listen." Eli looked at them, his brothers, his boyfriend, all ready to fight for him. It was more than he'd ever had growing up, but it still felt fragile, like it could slip away. "Okay," he said finally. "Let's do the feature." The interview was set for that afternoon at a small art studio in Brooklyn, a space loaned by one of Eli's old professors. The reporter, a woman named Aisha with a warm smile and sharp questions, sat across from Eli at a paint-splattered table. Julian, Ezra, and Ethan waited nearby, out of sight but close enough to feel like a lifeline. Aisha leaned forward, her recorder on. "Eli, your mural Unseen has captured a lot of attention. Tell me about it. What inspired it, and why it matters to you." Eli took a deep breath, his hands fidgeting. He thought of Julian's advice. "Tell them what it means to you." "It's about feeling invisible," he started. "I'm a triplet, and growing up, my brothers were always the ones people noticed. I was the quiet one, the one who didn't fit. When I came out, my parents, they didn't accept it. They acted like I wasn't there anymore." Unseen is about that pain, but also about finding yourself, about claiming your space even when no one else sees you. Aisha nodded, her eyes kind but focused. "Your parents have said they supported your art. How do you respond to that?" Eli's throat tightened, but he forced the words out. "They didn't. They never asked about my art, never came to my shows. They didn't even know I entered the contest. This win, it's mine, and I won't let them take it." The interview went on for an hour, Aisha digging into Eli's process, his struggles, his hopes. By the end, Eli felt raw but lighter, like he'd shed a weight he'd carried for years. When Aisha left, promising to publish the piece the next day, Eli sank into a chair, exhausted. Julian knelt beside him, his hand brushing Eli's cheek. "You were incredible," he said, his voice soft. "I'm so proud of you." Eli leaned into his touch, letting himself believe, just for a moment, that this could work. But that night, as they scrolled through social media, a new post from his parents stopped him cold. It was a polished video, filmed in their pristine living room. Margaret's eyes glistened with practiced tears as she spoke. "We love all our sons," she said. "Eli's struggling, but we're here for him. We always have been." David nodded beside her, his voice calm. "His art is a gift, and we're so proud. We just want him to come home." The video had thousands of likes, shares, comments praising their grace and love. Eli's stomach churned. It was a performance, perfectly crafted, and it was winning. "We need to hit back," Ezra said, his voice tight. "This is manipulation, plain and simple." But Eli shook his head, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know how much fight I have left." Julian pulled him close, his arms a shield. "You don't have to do it alone," he said. "We're in this together." Eli nodded, but the doubt was back, stronger now. His parents' story was polished, believable, and the world was buying it. Could he really keep fighting when the odds felt so stacked against him? The next morning, Aisha's article went live. Titled, "The Unseen Artist: Eli Hart's Journey to the Spotlight." It was raw and honest, weaving Eli's words with photos of Unseen glowing in Times Square. The response was immediate. Artists, activists, and queer communities shared it widely, their comments flooding with support. "Eli Hart is a voice we need," one tweet read. "His story is ours too," said another. But the backlash grew too. His parents' supporters doubled down, calling Eli ungrateful, accusing him of dragging his family through the mud. A few tabloids ran sensational headlines. Triplet tears family apart over art win. Eli tried to ignore them, but each one stung, chipping away at his resolve. Julian kept him grounded, dragging him out for walks through the city, away from screens. They wandered Central Park, the autumn leaves crunching under their feet, and for a few hours, Eli could breathe. Julian's hand in his was a reminder that he wasn't alone, that this fight was worth it. "You're changing things," Julian told him one afternoon, as they sat on a bench by the Bethesda fountain. "Not just for you, but for everyone who feels unseen." Eli wanted to believe him, but the weight of his parents' narrative was crushing. They'd hired a PR firm, Ezra discovered, and their polished story was gaining traction. Margaret and David were now doing TV interviews, their faces somber as they spoke of their troubled son. "We just want him to heal," Margaret said on one morning show, her voice breaking artfully. Ezra was furious, pacing Julian's apartment like a caged animal. "They're playing the victim, and it's working. We need something bigger, Eli. Something they can't spin." Ethan, scribbling in his notebook, looked up. "What if you do an exhibit? Not just Unseen, but all your work. Show the world who you are, what you've been through. Make it impossible for them to ignore you." The idea sparked something in Eli, a flicker of hope. His portfolio was full of pieces no one had seen, paintings that told the story of his life. The loneliness of being the forgotten triplet, the pain of his parents' rejection, the joy of finding love with Julian. An exhibit could be his voice, louder than any interview. Julian's eyes lit up. "I know a gallery in Chelsea. A friend from theater works there. They'd love to showcase a rising star like you." Eli hesitated. An exhibit meant vulnerability on a new level, his heart on display for strangers to judge. But he thought of Unseen, of the people who'd connected with it, and he nodded. "Let's do it." The next week was a blur of preparation. Julian's friend, Maya, secured the gallery for a weekend show. Ezra handled logistics, calling in favors to cover costs. Ethan curated the pieces, helping Eli choose paintings that told a cohesive story. Julian was everywhere, hanging lights, designing flyers, and keeping Eli from spiraling when doubt crept in. The exhibit, titled Visible, opened on a crisp Saturday night. The gallery was small but packed, the crowd spilling onto the Chelsea sidewalk. Eli's paintings lined the walls, vivid canvases of shadowed figures, vibrant bursts of color, and quiet moments of love. One piece, First Light, showed two men embracing under a street lamp, their faces blurred but their connection undeniable. It was Eli and Julian, immortalized. Eli stood in the corner, his heart pounding as strangers studied his work. Julian stayed close, his hand brushing Eli's when no one was looking. "They're seeing you," Julian whispered. "Really seeing you." The crowd was diverse: art students, queer activists, local artists, even a few reporters. Aisha was there, taking notes for a follow-up piece. Eli overheard snippets of conversation, raw, powerful, heartbreaking. For the first time, he felt like his voice mattered. But the moment of triumph was short-lived. Halfway through the night, Eli's parents arrived. Margaret's heels clicked on the gallery floor, her face a mask of calm. David followed, his expression stern. The crowd parted, sensing tension. Eli's stomach dropped. "Eli," Margaret said, her voice loud enough to draw eyes. "We came to support you." The lie was so blatant it burned. Eli's hands clenched, and Julian stepped closer, his jaw tight. Ezra and Ethan flanked them, a silent wall of support. "You weren't invited," Eli said, his voice low but steady. Margaret's smile didn't falter. "We're your family. We belong here." The room went quiet, all eyes on Eli. He felt the weight of every gaze, the pressure to stay silent, to shrink back like he always had. But he thought of his paintings, of Julian's hand in his, of the truth he'd fought so hard to tell. "You don't get to claim this," Eli said, his voice rising. "You ignored me my whole life. You didn't support me. You erased me. This is my story, and you don't get to rewrite it." The crowd murmured, some nodding, others whispering. Margaret's face tightened, but she kept her composure. "Eli, you're upset. Let's talk privately." "No," Eli said, stepping forward. "I'm done hiding. This is my truth, and I'm not letting you take it." For a moment, no one spoke. Then a woman in the crowd clapped, slow and deliberate. Others joined, the sound building until the gallery hummed with applause. Margaret and David stood frozen, their perfect image cracking. They left without another word, the door closing behind them. Eli's knees buckled, and Julian caught him, pulling him into a tight embrace. "You did it," Julian whispered. "You stood up to them." The rest of the night was a blur of congratulations, tears, and quiet pride. Eli's paintings sold out, and the exhibit became a rallying cry for those who'd felt unseen. But for Eli, the real victory was simpler. He'd found his voice, and he wasn't hiding anymore. The days after the visible exhibit were a whirlwind. Eli's story spread like wildfire. Art blogs, queer publications, and even mainstream outlets picked it up. Aisha's follow-up piece went viral, titled "Eli Hart's Visible Triumph." An artist reclaims his narrative. Social media buzzed with hashtags: Eli Hart, unseen, visible. Strangers shared their own stories of feeling overlooked, of fighting to be seen. Eli's inbox overflowed with messages from young artists, queer kids, and even triplets who related to his struggle. He read every one, his heart swelling and aching in equal measure. But the victory came with a cost. His parents went silent, retreating from the public eye after the gallery confrontation. Part of Eli was relieved, but another part, a small, stubborn part, grieved the family he'd never had. He didn't want their love anymore, not really, but the child in him still longed for the parents who'd never shown up. Julian noticed. He always did. One evening, as they sat on the fire escape of his apartment, the city sprawling below them, Julian took Eli's hand. "You're allowed to feel both," he said, his voice soft. "You can be proud and still hurt. It's okay." Eli leaned against him, the cool metal of the fire escape pressing into his back. "I just wish it didn't still matter," he admitted. "They don't deserve it." "They don't," Julian agreed. "But you do. You deserve to feel everything. Ezra and Ethan were constants too, their support unwavering. Ezra, ever practical, was already planning Eli's next steps, more exhibits, a possible book deal about his journey. Ethan, the dreamer, wrote a poem inspired by Unseen, which he read at an open mic night in Brooklyn. The crowd gave him a standing ovation, but Ethan dedicated it to Eli, his voice breaking as he said, "This is for my brother, who taught me what it means to be seen." The brothers were closer now than they'd ever been. Eli realized they'd never meant to overshadow him. They'd been caught in their own lives, unaware of how deeply he'd felt invisible. Their guilt was palpable, but so was their love. They were rebuilding, piece by piece, a bond that felt new and fragile but real. As winter settled over New York, Eli's career took off. Galleries reached out, offering shows. A queer art collective invited him to speak at their annual conference. Even NYU, where he'd felt so overlooked, contacted him about a guest lecture. Each opportunity felt like a step into the light, but Eli stayed cautious, grounding himself in Julian's love and his brother's support. One night, Julian surprised him with a plan. "We're going back to Times Square," he said, his eyes sparkling with mischief. "Just you and me." Eli frowned, confused. "Why? The mural's not even up anymore." Julian just grinned. "Trust me." They took the subway, the car rattling through the city's underbelly. When they emerged in Times Square, the familiar chaos hit Eli. The lights, the crowds, the pulse of New York. Julian led him to the same spot where they'd stood weeks ago, when Eli's name had first lit up the sky. The billboard was different now, advertising some new Broadway show, but Julian pointed to a smaller screen nearby, one used for local events. Eli's breath caught. His face was on it. Not just his name, but a photo from the visible exhibit, his eyes bright with defiance. Below it, in bold letters, "Eli Hart, the artist who made us see." It was an ad for a city arts initiative celebrating local talent. Eli's heart pounded as he read the words, his vision blurring. "How?" he managed, turning to Julian. Julian shrugged, his grin sheepish. "Maya pulled some strings. The gallery had connections. I just wanted you to see it." Eli pulled Julian into a hug, his face buried in Julian's shoulder. The crowd moved around them, oblivious, but for Eli, it was a moment of pure clarity. He wasn't the forgotten Triplet anymore. He was Eli Hart, artist, lover, brother, seen. But the story wasn't over. A week later, Ezra called with news that made Eli's blood run cold. "They're suing," he said, his voice tight. "Mom and Dad. They're claiming defamation, saying your video and the articles damaged their reputation." Eli's knees buckled, and he sank onto Julian's couch. "Can they do that?" he whispered. Ezra's voice was grim. "They're trying. I've got a lawyer friend looking into it, but we need to be ready." The news hit like a storm. Eli had fought so hard to claim his truth, but his parents weren't done. They wanted to drag him back into their shadow, to silence him again. Julian, Ezra, and Ethan rallied around him, promising to fight, but Eli felt the weight of it all, the cost of being seen. As he sat in Julian's apartment, staring at a blank canvas, Eli realized this was bigger than him now. His story wasn't just his. It was for everyone who'd ever felt invisible. He picked up a brush, his hand steady despite the fear. He'd keep painting, keep fighting, keep loving, because that's who he was. The lawsuit hung over Eli like a dark cloud, but he refused to let it dim his light. Ezra's lawyer friend, a sharp woman named Priya, took the case pro bono, calling his parents' claim a desperate grab for control. She warned it could drag on, but Eli was ready. He'd spent too long hiding. He wasn't going back. The weeks that followed were a balancing act. Eli painted feverishly, channeling his fear and hope into new work. His next series, Found, was softer than Unseen. Canvases of light breaking through shadows, of hands reaching out, of quiet moments of love. The art world noticed, and so did the public. His story had become a beacon for those who'd felt overlooked, and fan mail poured in. Letters from queer teens, estranged siblings, artists who'd never had the courage to share their work. Julian was his rock, always there with a laugh or a quiet touch when Eli's doubts crept in. One night, as they lay in bed, the city's hum filtering through the window, Julian traced circles on Eli's back. "You're changing lives," he said. "Not just yours. You see that, right?" Eli nodded, his throat tight. "I'm trying to." Ezra and Ethan were relentless too. Ezra worked with Priya, gathering evidence. Old emails, text messages, anything to prove their parents' neglect. Ethan wrote essays about Eli's journey, publishing them in literary journals that amplified his voice. Together, they were a team stronger than Eli had ever imagined. The lawsuit's first hearing came in early December, a cold morning in a Manhattan courthouse. Eli sat between Julian and Ezra, his hands clammy as he watched his parents across the room. Margaret's face was composed, but her eyes avoided his. David stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. Priya presented Eli's case with precision. His video, the articles, witness statements from professors and friends who'd seen his parents' indifference firsthand. The judge, a stern woman with silver hair, listened intently. When Margaret took the stand, her voice trembled with practiced emotion. "We love Eli," she said. "We've always supported him. He's just confused." Eli's chest burned, but he stayed silent, trusting Priya. When it was his turn, he spoke simply, his voice steady. "I just wanted to tell my story," he said. "I didn't want to hurt anyone, but I won't let them take my truth away." The hearing ended without a ruling, but Priya was optimistic. "They don't have a case," she told Eli outside the courthouse. "It's all optics. They're banking on public sympathy, but you've got the truth on your side." That night, Eli and Julian walked through the city, their breath visible in the cold air. They ended up in Times Square again, the lights as dazzling as ever. Eli's name wasn't on a billboard anymore, but he didn't need it to be. He felt seen, not just by the world, but by himself. "I love you," he told Julian, the words spilling out under the neon glow. "You made me believe I could do this." Julian's smile was soft, his eyes bright. "You did this, Eli. I just got to watch." Months later, the lawsuit was dismissed. The judge ruled in Eli's favor, citing lack of evidence for defamation. His parents didn't appeal, their public image too battered to continue. They faded from the spotlight, and Eli let them go, not with anger, but with a quiet release. He didn't need their approval anymore. Found debuted at a major gallery in Soho, drawing crowds bigger than visible. Eli stood among his paintings, Julian's hand in his, Ezra and Ethan nearby. The room buzzed with praise, but Eli's eyes kept drifting to one piece. A small canvas of 3 figures, not identical but equal, standing in light. It was the triplets, not as they'd been, but as they were now, brothers, united. As the exhibit closed, a young man approached Eli, his voice shy. "I'm a triplet too," he said. "The quiet one. Your story, it made me feel like I could be seen too." Eli's heart swelled. He hugged the man, tears stinging his eyes. This was why he'd fought, not just for himself, but for everyone who'd felt invisible. That night, in Times Square, Eli's name lit up again. Not on a billboard, but in the hearts of those who'd heard his story. He wasn't the forgotten triplet anymore. He was Eli Hart, artist, lover, brother, and finally seen.